This is Wendy's Point, which is named after my good friend Richard's wife, Wendy. It is the first point located just north of the Pleasant Valley Reservoir Dam on the eastern shore of the Owens River. If you have never heard of Wendy's Point, or more specifically, the Goddess of Pleasant Valley, as she has become to be known by the locals, I will attempt to recall the legend as best I can, but please keep in mind, as with all good fishing stories, over time they tend to take on a life of their own, making it difficult to tell what is fact and what is fiction. Back in our younger days, Richard and I would fish the eastern Sierras a couple of times of the year. The highlight of the year would be the Blake Jones Trout Derby at Pleasant Valley Reservoir in Bishop, California. As what normally happens with most young men, Richard met a beautiful young woman and invited her to one of our trips to the Derby. The fishing was great as usual at Pleasant Valley. All during our trip, Wendy would bring up the stringer to admire the fish we had caught. But I firmly believe she was only doing so to secretly brag about how much bigger her fish were than ours. We had about an hour before weigh-in at the Derby, and once again, Wendy went to admire our fish. This time, however, she forgot to stake the stringer down, and our fish went sailing back into the reservoir. The valley went eerily silent. All the men glared at Wendy, for they knew what this meant. We would not be able to enter the Derby. Obviously distraught, Wendy frantically paced up and down the shore, but our fish were nowhere to be found. Once Wendy realized that all was lost, she stood at the shore praying to the fishing gods, when out of the corner of her eye, she saw a flash, a glimmer, an answer from the gods, if you will. Wendy did not hesitate. She dove headfirst into the frigid water, and after what seemed like an eternity, finally emerged with stringer in hand. Everyone gave her a standing ovation. She was fully soaked, and since it was about 40 degrees or so in the valley, we hurried back to the Derby to weigh in our fish and put on some dry clothes. I can't remember if we won any of the prizes on that trip, but it didn't matter. On that day, Wendy had earned my respect. A few years later, we took their son Colin to Wendy's Point, where he was the only one to catch any of the fish. One of these days soon, hopefully, we'll take their daughter Bethany fishing there, so she can tell her children and her children's children the legend of Wendy's Point.